All right. 1 second. We're going to wait 1 second. A few seconds.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at this workshop for the AB 901 rulemaking process. I know a number of you have been participating in this process and have been through a few of these already, so thank you for your continued participation. We're going to go through a little bit of some of the background. I know some of you have heard this a few times before, but it might be new for some of you. So just bear with us. If you are participating remotely, we'll have on the bottom of the slides the email address to send in questions. We'll be monitoring that. But just for your reference, it's ab901.reporting@calrecycle.ca.gov. So send your questions or comments in that way, and then we'll be monitoring that, and we'll read them out to the group and try to respond to them. With that being said, we'll jump right into the presentation. Starting with a brief agenda, we'll go over the summary intent of the law, generally the affected parties. Then we'll talk about some of the main points, including thresholds for who reports and when, who end users are, and who end users are not, reasonable methods for a number of things, most notably estimating jurisdiction of, for determining jurisdiction of origin and estimating source sector. And then we'll conclude with enforcement and confidentiality discussion. Next slide. So broadly speaking, AB 901 does a couple of things. One, it's to update and streamline the procedures that we've used for the previous disposal reporting system that's been in place for a long time, utilizing new technology for online reporting, notifications, and then direct reporting to CalRecycle from facilities rather than having information move from a facility to a county and then from the county to CalRecycle. We're hoping that this is going to improve the data quality. Not only will we be getting data from more facilities, but we'll be removing a great deal of manual input, and hopefully that will result in a higher level of data quality as the data moves through the system. And of course, we'll be using the data that we'll be getting under the new system to further many of CalRecycle's mandates. The regulatory development process, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, we're just concluding the informal workshop phase. This is our third set of workshops, and this is we're anticipating this being the last set of informal workshops. These are used to scope the regulations before we move into the formal rulemaking process, which is a very structured process governed by the Office of Administrative Law, or OAL. And there are a number of strict timelines and procedures, including a great number of opportunities for members of the public to provide comments and see drafts, and then have those comments responded to by CalRecycle staff. We're currently hoping to get that process, the formal rulemaking process, started around late winter or early spring of 2017. We'll figure out exactly when that starts, depending on the extent and nature of the comments that we receive at this set of workshops. The process can take about a year. That does depend a little bit on how many comments we get during the process, but roughly a year. So we're looking right around the beginning of 2018 to be complete. We'll be developing the online reporting system somewhat in parallel, And we don't know exactly how long that will take either, but we're hoping to have it ready shortly after the rulemaking process is complete. So just to go over a couple of the major statutory changes, as I mentioned earlier, facilities are going to be reporting directly to CalRecycle rather than to counties. We're expanding the reporting requirements beyond just disposal reporting, which has been the case for the previous DRS system, to include reporting requirements for recycling and composting operations and facilities, as well as some requirements for transporters, exporters, and brokers, not only of disposal material, but also recycling and composting material. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the requirement now will be that all reporting must be done online using the tool that we'll be developing. And then lastly, AB 901 provides a new enforcement authority for CalRecycle to ensure that the reporting is done on time and accurately, including some civil penalties if that is not done. So that was just a very brief overview of what we're doing here. Ilanka is going to take over for me and walk everybody through some of the major pieces of the regulations, particularly some of the big changes since the last version of the regulations. So Ilanka, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ilanka Slatar. You may have gotten some emails from me. We're going to walk through some of the new developments since the first draft of the regulation, and also some of the updates since that draft. Since we put it out about a month ago, and we're still working on some of that language. So again, as a reminder for those watching online, any questions can be emailed to the ab901.reporting email that's on the screen now and is on each screen from here on. So you can email your questions in, we'll read them out loud in the room. And for these sections, we're going to go through the agenda items, and we'll take questions at each section. So if you have a question that's not being addressed in the current section, please hold that until the appropriate section. And if it's not in the overall agenda, then we can address it at the end of the presentation. All right, so we'll get started with the affected parties. So who are people who we are expecting to report? We're expecting anybody who is processing or recycling any of the materials here in this larger bullet. So that's including automobiles, carpet, construction demolition debris, furniture, glass, metal, organics, paper, plastics, solid waste, textiles, tire-derived rubber, and white goods. So, and whether they be landfills, transfer stations, material recovery facilities, brokers, exporters, auto shredders, dismantlers, composters, etc. End users are not required to report. Do we have any questions or comments about this list at this time? Yes, if you could please come up to the microphones in the front of the room to ask questions. Thank you.
And while you're coming up, just to clarify, we'll be going in greater detail into the specific requirements for most of these groups later on at other slides.
Right, so this is just a general, if you're handling this type of material according to the thresholds and other reporting requirements, this is just generally who's in, who's out, very, very broadly.
My name is Paul Ryan, and I'm a consultant. I represent two waste trade associations, various client cities and so forth, dealing with the beginning and the end of the waste issue, recycling, composting, and so forth. In the slide, you had dealing with transporters and brokers. Listening to your testimony and questioning from other stakeholders in the past, there needs to be some clarification on how you see this whole issue of transporters and brokers, because it sounds like in terms of the way you're addressing it, once for instance, if you're a composter, once you make your compost and somebody comes and picks it up and uses it at the end, then that's an end user, or that's how I interpret it. Now, that's fine, but for regulatory certainty, to make sure that someone in the future doesn't interpret things, a new enforcer 10 years from now that doesn't know the history. And I see this from time to time, and I've been dealing with your organization since the 70s. So I've seen many generations of new people come in, and each generation interprets things a little different. In terms of regulatory certainty, it's going to be very important that your definitions are clear so that it's not open to interpretation. Secondly, if you're defining brokers and transporters in such a way that, say, for instance, I have a client who comes and picks up compost, comes and picks up chip and grind material, and does further manufacturing to make straw wattles or filter socks and compost blankets and mulch applications and so forth. And then I sell it either wholesale to White Cap for construction, or I deliver the product to a developer in mass. Are they end users, or are they brokers and transporters?
Yeah, so I don't know if you got a chance to look at the definition of end user that we provided.
I did, but there's a circular portion in that definition. That's why I'm saying there needs to be clarification, because if end user is at a certain point and then further manufacturing, certain processing and so forth occurs, then we need to know, because then it becomes outside the regulation.
Yeah, so for actually the question of compost is probably one of the most straightforward answers we have as far as when it becomes a finished product and when the reporting line ends. We put compost specifically in as one of the finished products, and we consider it finished by the definition that we used in the definition section of compost after it has passed the contaminant requirements, the pathogen reduction and the metal concentration requirements from the compost
14.
regulations. Yeah. So at that point, it becomes a finished product, and anybody who uses it, whether it be to create a new product or a new blend or a filter sock, or if it's somebody who comes into your compost facility and picks it up in the back of their truck, all of those people would be considered end users because it is a final product.
My point is, it needs to be clarified in the proposed regulation, in addition to the discussion we're having today. Okay. And then further, needs to be clarification between what is in Title 14 referring to compostable materials, because there's sort of a circular thing between recycling, and what's in Title 14 under compostable materials, because chip and grind is referenced in two different places. And further, your definition out of PRC 4080 is a little beyond what's within the provisions of the statute right now. So are you intending to amend that somewhere or another, or is this going to be
definition?
You reference it in the draft regulations.
Yeah, we reference a lot of things. I don't have them
well,
all memorized.
You need to go back and look at those things. Because it creates, some of the things you've got in there create a circular argument, and I'm hoping that you take all that out and make it quite clear what your intent is.
Well, I'd love to hear maybe in a written form what you would consider to be a more clear or specifically
I'll make sure
where
that happens, but for public testimony and so forth, those are issues I think really need to be addressed, because, you know, contrary to how you see chip and grind versus compost, they can be substituted even within the Caltrans regulations and other things. So, you know, we hope that you treat things fairly and maintain an even playing field, because there are some issues there that still need further work, and we hope that you'll listen to industry. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We look forward to your written comments. Okay, any other questions about this section? We will talk more about some definitions and what recyclers and composters are to report a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, let's move on. So whoever has to report to the department is required to do so through our electronic reporting system, which we are calling the diversion and disposal reporting system, which is to replace the current disposal reporting system, DRS. So as Robert mentioned earlier, counties will no longer be required to report, and it will be individual facilities that will have to report and register through the electronic system. Basically, any flow that's happening between facilities must be reported by giving the DDRS number of the reporting entity and the receiving person, unless the receiving person is an end user, in which case they can be reported by a broader category instead of each individual flow for that quarter. And as far as deadlines, we'll talk about haulers a little bit more later, but if a hauler needs to report to the department directly, and we'll talk about when they have to do so, they'll have 60 days to do so. But when they have to report to a receiving entity, they have 30 days to do so. So that's part of the hauler requirements, but that's not a report to the department. So when haulers are taking material from a generator to a MRF or to a transfer station or a landfill, their only requirement is to report where it's coming from and what source sector to that facility and not to the department. So just want to make that clear. Another piece here is that when you have multiple facilities sited in the same site, so if, say, you have a transfer station and a MRF and a composting facility all on the same site, all of those facilities can file one report. The only thing that you cannot aggregate on the same site is if you have a disposal facility like a landfill co-located with a MRF or a composting facility. You cannot aggregate the disposal side in the same report as the recycling composting side. So that was a provision that was laid out in the statute. So any questions about these points? Do we have anything online?
Good afternoon, Dan Dominowski with Potential Industries. I was just comparing this slide with what was issued in July, and there's a section that's been removed. I think this is just a point of clarification, but what's removed now is something that said all receivers' information will be kept confidential and only aggregated information can be made public. That's still the case, correct?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, we just have a whole section on confidentiality at the end of the presentation. Yeah. I think today's gonna go by quicker than yesterday. Get careful. No? Okay.
Not now.
All right. All right, up next we have, what are we talking about next? The clicker is not, there it is, threshold. So we said first layer was, if you touch any of these materials, then you're probably gonna have some reporting responsibility. The second step is, okay, we've established you handle plastic for recycling. So the second step is how much plastic or how much C&D, how much material do you have to handle, recycle, compost, or dispose in order to fall under these regulations? In general, so most materials are gonna fall with the 100 tons per quarter threshold, and that's for anything that's being recycled. For concrete and asphalt, so if there's a facility that only does concrete and asphalt recycling, their threshold is 500 tons because we recognize that that material is a lot more dense and more heavy. So that threshold is a little bit higher. And then for organics that are directly land applied, that threshold is 50 tons for the person who is distributing that material. So unlike the composting regulations where we define land application and its limits for a site, for a specific site where it's being land applied, these thresholds apply to the hauler or transporter who is applying the material. So if they're applying more than 50 tons in a quarter, then they have to report those flows to the department. As far as composting and in-vessel digestion, we are piggybacking off of the compost and in-vessel regulations. So any entity that is composting or digesting that is not, or that is exempt from the regulations is also exempt from reporting. So this is going to basically pull out any of the agricultural composting operations that aren't taking solid waste. It's going to pull out the small community level composting. And the only exception here is wastewater treatment plants. So a wastewater treatment plant that is taking in off-site organics in excess of 100 tons or over 10% of their quarterly throughput will be expected to report on the fraction that is coming from off-site. So anything that's non-sewage that's added later in the process. And for those of you that are familiar with AB 1103, it was passed after 901, and it requires food waste self-haulers who haul more than 12 cubic yards of food waste per quarter to report on those flows to the department. So we did add that provision here since the last version. Do you have a question? Oh. Any questions or comments on this section? Anything online? Nope. All right, moving right on. So when we're talking about what needs to be reported, it depends on where it's going. So any material that's going to disposal will have the requirements of source sector and jurisdiction of origin. So jurisdiction of origin we're used to, at least in the disposal side. What would be a new requirement would be for MRFs and the residuals that are coming out of the material recovery facility will have to be allocated to the jurisdictions of origin as well. And source sector here, we've asked to be broken down into 3 categories, being single-family residential, commercial and multifamily as 1 category, and self-haul. So those are the 3, and we'll go into a lot more detail as to all of the different ways that you can estimate source sector a little later in the presentation. We know that this is going to be something new for most people, but we've included a lot of different options for people to be able to estimate that. So hopefully you'll be able to use one of the multitude of options in a way that's not going to be very difficult to do, and you won't have to do a lot of extra data tracking, and hopefully you'll be able to make that change fairly simply. So that's our hope anyway.
And I'll add for clarification that the source sector reporting is not to be reported by jurisdiction of origin, but rather on a facility-wide basis for the quarter. So a facility will report all of their jurisdiction of origin numbers as they always have through the old DRS system, just the same. And then they will have a total of 3 new numbers. 1 number for the facility for the quarter for single-family residential, 1 number for commercial multifamily for that facility for the quarter, and 1 number for self-haul for the facility for the quarter. It's not, and a lot of people have brought up some concerns about having it by jurisdiction of order, and as you add it all up, it becomes more and more difficult for that reporting. And so I just want to make it clear, it's for the facility as a whole, not by jurisdiction of origin.
Thank you. As far as a recycling flow, recycling and composting is going to be reported just by a material type. So there's no jurisdiction of origin and no source sector requirement on recycling flow. So for a MRF, and we'll talk more about this when we go through the flowcharts, but for a MRF that's taking in a large volume of material, all of the bales going out, or all of the material that's going out for recycling, is just going to be total tons of material type. So if all your MRF does is sort mixed paper and CRV, then you're going to say 1,000 tons of mixed paper and 1,000 tons of CRV went out the door, and that's it for that. And then if you have 100 tons of residuals, those residuals need to then be allocated to the jurisdiction of origin and their source sector for your whole facility. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about each individual reporter and what they have to do. And all of the flows, like we said earlier, have to include who you sent it to, except for end users, which can be aggregated by category. So if you, for example, are a composter and you have 500 different people come up with their pickup trucks and load a bunch of compost in the back of their pickup truck, you would just report, I had 100 tons direct to consumers. And that's it for that. For all of these reporting for recycling and composting material, that's all at the back end. So we're not going to be asking material types for feedstocks, for example, for composting and digestion. There's no inbound, there's only outbound tracking. So do we have any questions or comments on this section?
Good afternoon. My name is Leonard Lang, Upper Room Consulting. On the origin, if I'm running a MRF and I'm getting material in from 7 or 8 different cities, are you asking us to track the origin?
Yes.
Well, and I'll clarify that if at a MRF, the only thing that you have to report jurisdiction of origin on is the residuals that go to disposal. So you won't have to tell us what's coming into your facility, and you don't have to tell us the jurisdiction of origin for the recyclables or compostables that leave your facility. But the disposal, the residuals that go to a disposal facility, if you send them out to a landfill, you do have to allocate the jurisdiction of origin for that portion. And that may be based on your billing records, based on the tickets from who comes into your facility, or if you know something about the composition of the materials that come into your facility and you know where the trash is coming from and where the recyclables are coming from, then you allocate it based on your understanding of how your facility operates and pass that on just for the portion that goes to disposal.
Composition and analysis. Well, that's not.
Well, you may do that if you like. Some facilities do it, and if they happen to know that, then they're certainly welcome to use that. But if they'd rather just say, I got 20% of my stuff from the city of Sacramento and 50% from the city of Davis, they can just assume that that percentage of what came in their gate is the same percentage as the residuals that left, pass that number along, and that's all the work they have to do.
Doesn't work that way, but I understand what you're saying. Couple areas of clarification. It would be nice if you guys introduced yourself so we know who we're dealing with.
Sure.
And going through this presentation to me is confusing. It would be, I think, more beneficial to go through the proposed regulations and see exactly what you're talking about with the language. We could do that.
So Yes, we'll introduce ourselves for those of you who don't know us for sure. And I don't know that we'll walk through all of the language today. We've walked through some of the language at previous workshops, and what we're trying to do is sort of hit on the major topical areas that, particularly those that have changed since the previous workshops, because again, it is quite a lot to go through every word sort of the regulations and from the beginning. So we won't be doing that today. But we can, we'll try to reference back the sections where we're discussing so that you can look back at the actual language and see what that language is. And if after the workshop you find yourself with some, specific language comments after the conversation that we have here in the room together, we'll be accepting written comments from folks, or you can always call us on the phone too and ask questions and get some follow-up as well.
Well, if you add the references as you go through the presentation, that'll help me.
Great.
Sure, and the presentation does roughly correspond to the regulations in the way it's laid out. So, for example, slide number 9, that's reports to the department, is very similar to section X3, which is the registration, and then the following section is part of the same section. And then as we go through the reporting requirements, it's in the same order as it is in the regulations. So we start with haulers. Oops. We start with haulers, and then I don't know, whichever order they're in is the same order as the sections are in the regulations. So I tried to parallel as much as possible, but some things were easier to talk about. For example, some things that are in the definitions we brought up later just to make it a little bit easier of a flow.
But we'll again try to sort of just mention, if we're talking, this will be in this section or something like that. We're not going to be able to give, every single line every time we say something, but certainly we'll try to get you some bearing, particularly if you're not terribly familiar with the regs from previous workshops.
Okay. Since we'll be doing electronic reporting, will you be adopting the electronic forms as a part of the regulations?
No, so the forms won't be part of the regulations.
I got a no there and a yes there.
Yeah,
When
no,
we say electronic forms, so we're going to have a database where people are going to enter their information. So it's going to be laid out kind of like a form. You can either type stuff in or you could upload documents. But I don't know what do you consider an electronic form?
We've done forms and regulations in the past, and it ends up causing a fair amount of trouble. And so we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be laying out the information that will be required in the regulations, and then the database system will be designed to capture that information. But we're not going to be putting the actual electronic forms into the regulations.
Okay.
Yeah,
And just to loop back to your first request, all the way to my left, Ilanka, she's introduced herself. She's the lead staff on the project. Directly to my left is Kate Nitta. She's in our legal office. Robert Carlson on the project lead for the rulemaking. Paulina Lawrence is in our enforcement office. And then all the way to my right is Elliot Block, our chief counsel.
Well, good afternoon. My name is June Mendez. I'm with LK Cubic Report, and we're basically dismantlers. And I just want to clarify that you're just asking to report solid waste that we generate from our operation, right?
No, so we're asking for basically your scrap metal, how much you're sending as metal, or if you are recycling glass or recycling plastic parts that are taken off of cars, that would be the flow. So anything that's taken off and sold as a part, like sold for resale, basically, we're not asking anything about resale. So only recycling. So if you're sending, a bunch of scrap metal parts off for recycling, that's the kind of flow that we're interested in.
Because you mentioned earlier that anything that we send for disposal, right?
Right. So it's recycling and disposal, but our main interest is the recycling, and disposal is also a requirement for recycling facilities. But basically, we're considering auto recyclers as we would any other recycler who are involved in the business of taking things from that are no longer useful, right? A car that may end up going to the landfill, or it may end up dumped somewhere, but instead you guys are making good use of that stuff, taking it back, taking all the useful parts off of it, and the rest would be hopefully going to recycling. So that we'd like to get more of a handle on that industry and
So
how they're
basically,
helping
you
the
want
state.
to know any material that we scrap, we reported to CalRecycle?
Yeah, so that would just be one number, right? So for your facility, for your whole operation, how many tons of scrap metal did you send off in a quarter?
Okay, and this is, not based on ferrous and non-ferrous material, right? I mean, just the whole tonnage of scrap generated as scrap metal?
Depending on how
that
you're,
you sent to recycling.
right, so if you're a recycling facility, if your operation qualifies, and it sounds like it more likely would, you would report the total number of tons by material type. So if you're sending out mixed scrap metal, then you would report mixed scrap metal and the total tons of that. If you are sending out glass, you would report the total tons of glass. If you're sending out mixed car shred, then you would just report shredded cars. But yes, you would have a tons by material type that you send out. You don't have to do a further composition analysis of what's in a load. It is the level of detail at which you're sending it away from your facility.
So if we have cores for rebuilding, we don't have to generate,
If it's being rebuilt, that's not recycling.
Okay.
So that doesn't come into our reporting requirements at all.
So basically, anything that we shipped out for shredding is supposed to be reported,
That would be reported, correct.
assuming that it's over the threshold per material. If I
Over the
have
threshold for your facility.
For the facility. So if your whole facility is producing more than 100 tons per quarter of recyclable material, then that you would report all of that together.
And the waste, the waste that you send out, non-recro and recro waste to
Correct.
out of state, we have to report it to?
Yes.
Isn't that something that you just could get out of DTSC?
The DSA?
No, DTSC, and we sent,
Oh, DTSC.
yeah, the Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest, we pay taxes on that, and,
Oh, I thought you said non-hazardous waste.
well, yeah, there's considered California hazardous waste.
Right.
And
Hazardous waste, non-RCRA California hazardous waste would not be reportable under these regulations. I misheard you. I thought you said non-hazardous waste.
Yeah.
But no, hazardous waste, RCRA or non-RCRA hazardous waste is not a reportable flow under 901.
and the non-haz, like oily water, we still have to report it?
Oily water would also fall under a non-reportable flow for 901.
Okay, but
Because that would be,
So the materials that you would have to report to us on would be metals, plastics, glass.
so, yeah, basically, we will give you everything, anything that we generate, scrap, and.
Right, whatever
Correct.
is being sent for recycling. So if it's being sent for hazardous waste disposal, that's totally out from us.
So it's just giving our,
So if it's going to a regular landfill, then you would report that as disposal. And whatever is going for recycling, then those materials you would report.
just like giving you our financial statement, giving you all our, the materials that we generate for our process, right?
We're not asking for any financial data.
Oh, well, the thing is, that's the data. The
Well,
material that we generate, ferrous and non-ferrous material that goes out.
yep, those would be the numbers that would need to be reported under 901.
That might be a
But
problem.
all of the information remains confidential. So if you're concerned about, that being able to be translated into a financial statement, we are not allowed as a public agency to release any information that might be seen as a trade
Proprietary.
secret or a confidential information, unless we were to aggregate it to the level of, say, the state or a region, that at which point you could no longer distinguish what belongs to who, right? So if there's 3 or more car shredders or recyclers in the state, then we could say, okay, the state of California recycled X amount of iron or X amount of ferrous metals, etc.
So
So that would be the type of information that would be made public, or that would be made available via a public records request. But anything else about your specific company is going to remain confidential within CalRecycle.
Yeah, so it's just site specific. I mean, we don't know cars would come from different locations and,
Wouldn't matter where the cars came from. A particular facility, your lot, your shredding facility, or your dismantling facility, or wherever you are, that's the facility that needs to report. And as a recycling facility, you report what leaves your operation. So if you send 1,000 tons of ferrous, non-ferrous metals out of your facility, that's all you have to report. You report the tons of metal and where it goes, but you don't have to say where it came from.
well, wouldn't it be easier just to get it from the shredding facilities? Because they're the ones who process those material.
There will also be
They
reporting.
will very likely also have a reporting requirement.
So that would be more generic than getting it from individual dismantlers.
We'll
Right,
be
so-
getting information from both facilities.
Oh, okay, well, I guess I have to, well, again, it's something that, again, for us, it seems proprietary. I mean, we're giving this information, anybody who requests information based on Freedom Information Act could get all that information.
So
Well,
the
no.
specific terms of AB 901 lay out confidentiality protections.
Okay,
So did you want to take, maybe our chief counsel here can talk about it more?
Well, you actually just gave the answer. So we are going to talk about confidentiality near the end of this presentation, but all of that information will remain confidential.
okay.
We are required by law to do that. So
Yeah.
Public Records Act request, FOIA request, whatever anybody wants to call it, we would be responding to those saying this information is confidential.
One
You
thing,
can't have
one of the problems that I'm seeing also is we process more than 250,000 cars a year, and I don't know if every quarter we could get that information at the time frame that you're requesting. It's every quarter.
You don't keep records about how much material you ship out that you could aggregate at the end of the quarter?
Well, the thing is, well, every quarter we know how much we bought for each car, but again, we won't know which are scrap, which are for rebuilding or recores.
But it would only be what leaves your facility. So at the end of the quarter, you add up all of the shipments that you sent from your facility.
Anything that leaves out at that particular.
Anything that comes out during that quarter is reported. And if it's still in your lot, then it's still in your lot. And you don't report it until it gets sent off for recycling.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And, if you'd like to meet with us or give us a call to talk more about this, we'd be definitely willing to do that. Okay. So as a reminder here, most recycling facilities and operations and composting facilities will only report material type outbound. So they're not going to report jurisdiction of origin or source sector. And most disposal facilities are going to report jurisdiction of origin or source sector, not material type, just as a review before we get into the more specific requirements. Goodness. There's quite a lag on the clicker. I'm afraid to push the button. I think it catches up. Okay. So, we're going to go through each of the sections of the reporting requirements for different types of players. Starting with haulers. For the following slides, anything that you see in blue is a mostly disposal flow. And as a reminder, for disposal, we're reporting jurisdiction of origin and source sector. And anything that's in purple is going to be recyclables. So for that, we're reporting material type. The entity in the green square in the middle is who we're talking about right now, what their reporting requirements are. CalRecycle and the orange arrow is the information flow, so that's where you're reporting. And the direction of the arrows is generally where materials are flowing. So in this case, the hauler that's taking materials to a disposal facility or a transfer station is only obligated to tell the receiving facility the jurisdiction of origin and source sector information. In the only cases in which haulers are going to report directly to CalRecycle is if the hauler is taking material directly from a generator, so from a business or from residences in the state, directly to another state or outside of California, anywhere. So in that case, they'll report directly to CalRecycle because there is no other intermediary facility, right? They're taking it directly from a generator to outside of the state, so nobody else is going to report it, so they have to report it to CalRecycle. Same thing with an end user. If you're taking something directly from a generator to an end user, and this could be something like green waste used for direct land application, for example, that's going to be reported directly to CalRecycle. In all other cases, when they're taking material from a generator to another facility for processing or for disposal, it's that facility's responsibility to report that flow. And since recyclers and composters are generally not required to report jurisdiction of origin or source sector, then haulers don't really need to report anything to them unless, for some reason, that recycler or composter requests that information. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that circumstance is a little later. I'm just going to go ahead and get through these, and then we'll take questions at the end of this whole section of the flowcharts. So we did talk about, briefly mentioned the food waste self-haulers, which is a new category. This was added by the legislation AB 1103. And it's a pretty specific definition of what they consider a food waste self-hauler. This is anybody who generates and transports food waste, which is defined in the regulation, using their own employees and their own equipment to take it to a location that they do not own and operate. So this language came directly from 1103, and they would have to do over 1 cubic yard of food waste per week, or equivalently 12 cubic yards per quarter. And then they would have to report that to CalRecycle if they fit all of those criteria. If they don't fit that criteria, if you have somebody who ships 5 cubic yards 1 week for a whole quarter of food waste, then they don't have to report to CalRecycle because they're not meeting that threshold level of 12 cubic yards in a quarter. Now this is a little bit confusing, but we had to put that in there. So I'm going to take, is there any questions or comments actually on this section, on the food waste self-hauler definition? Anything online? No? Okay. Okay, transfer stations and MRFs. Here we tried to simplify the question of flows between multiple facilities. We know that sometimes things can go from a MRF, maybe those residuals will go to a second MRF where they're further processed, and maybe that material then goes to a transfer station before it ends up going to landfill. So we tried to come up with a solution to make it easier to transfer that information along this chain. And the thing that we thought made the most sense from a data management perspective and from a user perspective would be to request that the jurisdiction of origin information be input by a transfer station or MRF in 2 different ways. So for material that they are collecting directly from haulers, then the haulers would tell them the jurisdiction of origin information and the source sector directly. But for material that they may be getting from another transfer station or MRF, they would just tell us that MRF. Okay, so they would say, for example, if they get material from 5 different jurisdictions directly from a hauler, and then they get material from 2 other MRFs in the area, they would say, I got 1,000 tons from MRF A, and I got 1,000 tons from MRF B, and then I got 500 tons from direct haulers, and this many is from jurisdiction 1, this many from jurisdiction 2, etc. And why we did that is because then we can follow that information for the previous transfer station MRF who's going to report in the same way. So that jurisdiction information is going to go into our system and then be allocated along that chain so that the user, being the reporter, doesn't have to keep track of where things came from a previous facility. They only have to worry about what's being direct hauled to their facility in terms of the jurisdiction of origin information.
And I'll add that this is very much the same information as has been required under the previous DRS regs for the disposal side of things. The big difference being just that the information, rather than being reported by a facility to the disposal facility and county, which would then be submitted to CalRecycle, instead of going that route, that same information is being reported directly to CalRecycle. For the disposal side of things, there's a small amount of new reporting requirement on the recycling side, particularly for MRFs that are sending residuals, who oftentimes previously reported jurisdiction of origin as the host jurisdiction, whichever jurisdiction that MRF happened to be located in, as opposed to where that material actually came from. So that'll be the majority of the new reporting on that side for the MRFs. But for many of these other facilities, it'll be the same information, just reported to a different place.
So that's on the inbound. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, we're going to work under the default assumption that your material coming in is going to be allocated at the same rate as your residuals. So for example, if you get 80% from one jurisdiction and 20% from another, and it goes through the MRF, then the default assumption is that your residual is going to be in the same allocation. You will have a chance to change that based on your own information. So if you know that one jurisdiction has a dirtier flow than another, you will have a chance in the system to adjust those numbers based on your own information. Did you have something?
We have a question from online if you're
Online?
finished with that
Okay.
slide.
So then the last step would be, as we talked about earlier, your outflow. So we took care of the jurisdiction of origin piece for the disposal. So then you'd only have to tell us the total tons that went out for disposal to another disposal facility or another transfer station or MRF. And then you would just tell us tons by material type going to recycling or composting. We'll talk about what material type means a little bit later. But you would tell us how many tons went to each of those destinations for the quarter, unless we're talking about end users, in which case you can use the categories instead of telling us specifically where it went. Let's take the online question, and then if anybody has any questions in the room, you can work your way forward to the microphones.
Yeah, this is a question on the last topic, food waste self-haulers. This is from Stacy Hubbard from Riverside County. They said, we have an entity that delivers food waste to one of our landfills for use in a composting program. Is that entity required to report directly to CalRecycle?
So if that entity is generating that material, then they would be. But if they are collecting that material from several different places, then they would just report as any other person that's hauling material. So if they're taking it to a composting facility, their requirement would basically be not much, right? They would just show up and drop off the material, because that in that case, the composter is required to report on their outbound material. Any questions in the room? Okay. And we talked about that. Okay, disposal facilities. Disposal facilities are to report jurisdiction of origin and source sector for all material disposed. And that's, we've reported jurisdiction of origin for many years, so the new piece here would be source sector. We'll talk more about how people can estimate source sector here in a little bit, but we're using the same approach that people are going to report for material that's coming directly from haulers or transporters. They're going to report the jurisdiction of origin for that material. And for materials that are coming from transfer station MRFs, then they would just tell us which MRF and which transfer station it came from. So same approach as for transfer station MRF on that end. And then if any materials do come out of the disposal facility, like if they do have some recycling or some composting activities on the same site, they would have to additionally file a separate report for those activities as well. So if they are recycling, if they're pulling out, white goods or scrap metal or anything like that, or they have a drop-off on site, they would report on those flows as a recycling flow, which means that it's just material type and they don't have to do jurisdiction of origin or source sector on it. Beneficial reuse is staying mostly the same. You're just going to report your jurisdiction of origin and material type for ADC, AIC, and other beneficial reuse. But we have had a lot of usage of this other category, so we need to see a little bit more detail on it this time. So we're going to expand on the other beneficial reuse categories to try to get at what people are actually doing with that material, because we've seen a pretty big increase in the usage of that category that we're not always sure as to how it's actually being used. So we'll see those categories as they stand right now in the next slide. But finally, we're still going to keep track of disaster waste, designated waste, and construction demolition material as well. So that's staying the same. For beneficial reuse, these are the categories of beneficial reuse that most LEA, is this the LEA list? I don't remember specifically. Yeah. So the local enforcement agents approve this list of beneficial reuse applications, and we think it's a little bit long, and we're hoping that we can condense it to fewer categories. But we're not sure what the best way to condense this list would be. So, we can think of a few different ways to kind of slice this and to aggregate it into larger categories. So we are asking for your help on this. If there's any way that you're doing things at your facility that would make sense for you to divide these categories into fewer categories, we'd love to hear those suggestions, because we want to make this as simple as possible for people. So if there's, if 1 and 3 and 5 should be together and, 7 is always different, then that's something that we'd like to know. So take a look at this, think about it, send us an email. Again, we want to make this as easy as possible for the community. So any comments on this at this time on the beneficial reuse categories? Yes, you can come on up to the microphone.
Jeff Zagenbein with Association of Compost Producers. And
If
the
I could just
benef-
ask you to step forward a little bit so the people listening remotely can hear you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Jeff Zagenbein, Association of Compost Producers. And the beneficial reuse categories, those are exempt, correct? Is that what that means?
Exempt from,
Exempt from the reporting? Or is that just the category?
no, those are the categories that, so we're talking about disposal facilities here. So we're talking about
Okay.
landfills. So composters generally don't have beneficial reuse because what you're doing is making compost. Or are you actually using, well, we don't have, no, this is just for landfills.
Okay, I wasn't clear about that. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Anything online? All right. Moving on. Did I skip something? Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about recyclers and composters and what they would report. This is what the reporting flow would look like for them. Again, we're only focused on the outbound material. For materials sent for disposal or for recycling, for composting, for processing of any kind, you're just going to tell us the total tons by material type sent to them. For material sent to an end user, again, you can group that by the end user categories within a region, and we'll talk more about that later. As a reminder, we'll talk about it. Most recycler composters don't need to give jurisdiction of origin or source sector information for their disposal, but there is an exception, which is if they're producing a lot of disposal material. So if they're doing over 100 tons per quarter, that's going to disposal out of their facility. So if they're, recycling 1,000 tons and then 100 of those tons are going to disposal, then we want to capture that jurisdiction of origin information. So as some of you know, it can be hard to cite a composting facility. Part of that challenge is that jurisdictions have a mandate to divert 50% of their waste, and we're trying to get away from the host jurisdiction having to absorb the disposal of some of these facilities. So by allocating the jurisdiction of origin information to the actual generators of the material, we're hoping that it'll kind of ease that transition for new recycling and composting facilities to be cited, so that people that are hosting them don't get stuck with lots and lots of tons of disposal that's now allocated to that host jurisdiction. So that's something that we were trying to maybe to be more fair as to where the material is really coming from that ends up being disposed.
And I'll add, just for those following along, the details of that are in section X.7, subsection B, under the requirements for recycling and composting facilities, if you want to read the details of that. We have a comment or question?
Yeah, just clarification. Could you put the slide back up? Dealing with the recycler composter to the transfer station MRF. Normally, the materials most likely will come from a transfer station MRF to the recycler or composter, whichever is occurring. So in terms of that chart, then is your thinking that might be the material as you receive maybe contaminated material and so forth, and you do further processing?
Sure.
Is that how you're envisioning this?
Right.
I couldn't quite connect how you're associating the transfer MRF thing, whether it's inbound to the facility or it's outbound.
Yeah, so this is all outbound. So we're asking for a recycler or composter to report on their outbound flows. So in this chart, you see the arrows are pointing from the recycler out to all of the other facilities.
That would probably be a very rare occasion, I would suspect.
So some composters will get pretty dirty material. Or I've been to a digester that has this depackaging machine, right? So they put this in the depackager and all the organics come out, and then they have all this leftover plastic wrappers and little yogurt cups or bottles or whatever, and they send all that stuff to a MRF to be recycled. So that's an example of that
Yeah.
flow.
So if you're running a picking line, I could see that, yeah. It was just sort of a little confusing there.
Sure.
Thank
No, I mean, there's a million different ways that the material flows through the system, so it's been a fun challenge to try to figure out how to accommodate all of these different types of flows. We have here another question.
Yes, Dave Ools with Ools Materials. We do a concrete and asphalt recycling. Can you put, back, please. So our operation is pretty simple. Obviously, companies import concrete and asphalt into our facilities. Majority of our product is would be considered an end user here. And then we do have, obviously, ferrous metal going out to recyclers. The only issue is we do have some reject material that's sorted out of it that would be going to a disposal facility. Now, for us, it's up to the carrier. If we're dealing with waste management or a CR&R, whatever, if they take it to a facility, I mean, they're disposing it, whether they're taking it back to their own MRF or their own facility, a disposal facility. Is that just the same process we're going to go through? For us, it's all going out to a disposal. That product's going out to a landfill.
Yeah.
Whether it stops by a MRF on the way, or if it's just going directly to that. But a lot of times that's not our decision. That's
Right.
the contract company.
Yeah, so in that case, we're going to call them a transporter. Your transporter is going to be who you tell us you gave it to, right? So
Right.
if you don't know where it's going to end up, you just tell us, CalRecycle, we sent 100 tons or 10 tons of disposal material to Waste Management, and here's their address. And then your reporting requirement is fulfilled.
Okay, so
And then they would have to then report. So now they, as a transporter, let's say it's Waste Management, who's your contractor,
right.
they come and pick up a 100-ton truckload of stuff. Like, we don't know what it is, doesn't matter what it is. but
Well,
they're
most
gonna
of that
take
stuff
it.
is going to it's going to go to a landfill probably
Right.
majority of the time, but
But you don't know.
we don't know.
And
They
it
could
doesn't
take
matter.
They could take it to one of their own facilities, or they can take it directly right to the county landfill.
Right, so what your interaction is between your facility and Waste Management as a transporter. So you just say, we sent 100 tons to Waste Management, and you're done.
Right.
And now we go to Waste Management, and now they have a reporting obligation, and they, as a transporter, have to say, I took 100 tons of material to this transfer station, or that landfill, or this MRF, or wherever it is that they took it. And so
Okay,
you
so-
just have to say where
So
you.
the burden's on them,
That's
not
right.
necessarily on us, to say, okay,
No,
we-
unless you actually said, hey, Waste Management, come haul this stuff to the landfill at this address over there, and they come and they just serve as a truck
Yeah.
driver. But if they're the ones that are actually taking it and they know where it goes and you don't, then that's on them.
yeah, well, okay, well, majority of the time, it's probably going to one location, but it does, they have the ability to take it to their, a
It's
MRF
it's on them.
on them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, would this be reporting as a company-wide reporting, or is it per recycling facility,
Per site.
per site? Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So
thank
if
you.
you have 10 sites across the state, then
Yeah.
each site is going to have their own report.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll talk more about transporters and brokers here next, in fact. Okay, we did want to bring up that we have a definition of organics up on the regs, and this is slightly modified from the version that you see defined in the latest version. We did add biosolids and digest states specifically to this definition. So I just want to bring that to your attention and see if there's any comment on that small change. So we added this because as we talked about earlier, everything that is going to be reported on the recycling side is on the outbound. So if we have a AD facility or a wastewater treatment plant that are processing organics, they're going to have to report on the biosolids that come out. We're not getting any inbound information. So we added digestates and biosolids to make it explicit that those things are to be reported by those facilities that ship out that material. And we have a comment in the room. You can come on up and sit here in the front.
In terms of your definition, could you put that back up? Without the inclusion of compostable materials, it is difficult to understand, because if, for instance, mulch is a very broad term, and it can include rubber and other kinds of organics that really are not fitting with anything such as food, green waste, landscaping, and pruning materials, or materials that are after the 72 hours or so forth become, well, they're compostable materials that ultimately can become compost. So I think you need to look at the definition and modify it just slightly to clarify and differentiate mulch in a general sense versus compostable materials.
Yeah, we did hear that same comment yesterday at the workshop, and we will definitely take a look at
Yeah,
that.
it's not quite there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Mahajer, LA County Task Force. The expanded definition of organic, the problem that I can see, it is not consistent with what is called out in the AB 1826. And AB 1826, with the definition of organic by itself, has created a lot of headaches, and that's why I'm in the next room in the court fighting that definition. And if you're going to be adding that language, then I would like to see in a statement that says only for this particular purpose you are going to use this, and it's not a statutory definition.
Yeah, all of the definitions that are in AB 901, so that whole definition section starts with that statement that it's all of these definitions are for the purposes of this article.
This particular issue of organic, it's really I'm fighting right now for about 3 months with the definition of organic waste out of the 1826, so you do need to reemphasize it again, even in that particular paragraph.
Okay, do you have any particular suggestions or things that you don't like about this definition that you'd like to suggest?
Well, this definition, because I come and open this, and I don't read the previous 10 pages or previous 15 pages. And when I read this, my only reaction is, well, because I was very involved with 1826 that was written, well, this is not consistent with the 1826, so it's illegal.
So 1826 is the
But
requirement.
if you put the language also over here that for this purpose, even though you have it at the beginning, that would eliminate that problem.
Okay, but just as you well know, 1826 is a requirement on the businesses and jurisdictions that have the businesses, right, for commercial entities. So this is a requirement that's on a whole different set of people.
No, you can't operate like that, because 1826 very specifically requires jurisdiction to tell county recycle if somebody is not implementing the organic waste diversion.
Right, for the businesses.
But right now is for the businesses, but 1826 also gives the board I mean, the county recycled the authority by 2018. If the diversion of the 50% is not being accomplished based on the estimate, then they can also include residentials. So looking at all this stuff that I'm just saying, it is a very simple things, a simple sentence, putting it over here with this definition, and makes it one hell of a lot easier for the agency and the reporters that they have to comply.
Okay, we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Anything online? Okay. So, under most circumstances, transporters and brokers, let me back up. Under most circumstances, transporters will not have to report. Transporters and brokers, we've lumped together because some of them might be doing similar things or acting in similar ways. As we talked earlier when the construction demolition person came up, if someone is taking possession of a material, so we introduced this new concept of possession to basically say if you as a facility own the material and you've sold it to someone else or you've sent it to someone and you know where it's going, then you are to report on that material as going to this landfill or this transfer station or this end user. But if you don't know, so if say I'm a MRF and I sold my bales to Bob, and then I don't know what he's gonna do with it because he's a broker. I sold my bales to Bob, and that's what I report. I sold this many bales of plastic to Bob. And now Bob is liable for the remainder of that reporting for that material. So the transporter and broker, if they take possession of a material, then they have to report to the department for that flow. If they don't take possession, so if you say, hey, Bob, can you help me find a market for this material? And they say, yeah, here's this company and wherever it is. Then you say, okay, thanks, Bob. I'm going to sell it to this facility. Then you are still liable for that reporting because you possessed the material until you sold it to the receiving facility. So we know it's a little bit tricky, but we're trying to make it so that we avoid the same reporting of the same material in the same transaction, basically. So any questions or comments here on the broker piece? I'm sorry, I did forget to mention that transporters who are exporting, so if they take possession, they're exporting, they would report jurisdiction of origin and source sector if it's waste material, and they would report that material type if it's going to composting or recycling anywhere else. Yes, question.
Yeah, well, my question would be, if we everything that we're selling as a product out that's going to the end user could be defined as a construction project, or it could be designed as a transporter. I mean, sometimes we contract on a big project, and there'd be a transport company that's second party to the end user.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for us, we're still selling it to the end user.
Correct.
It's just going through
Right. So in that case, you would just tell us
another transport.
Right. So we want to avoid that transporter who's just some guy that they hired to move stuff.
Right.
They're not going to be reporting.
I'm still reporting as an end user, regardless if it's a trucking company is purchasing it or versus going to either we're selling it to a job site, or there's a third party or a second party picking it up for the contractor going to the same job site. To us, it's all the same. It's going to the end user.
Right, so
And
it-
that's what, and that's when we report that, it's one number versus having the same number reported twice. Is that what you're saying?
correct.
Okay, all right.
Getting back to my earlier example, I'll be specific so I can sort it out in my own mind. I'm a company that's going to make filter socks out of compost for MPDS and all the other things. And I go up to this composter, several composters, and say, hey, I need 500 tons from you, 1,000 tons from you, because I'm going to make these things in bulk. And I come to your yard and pick up the thing in my own transfer rig and produce the product and then broker it around now, where, because we talked about that particular entity as being an end user before. Are they still an end user?
Yes,
So there's no need for us to report
No.
as the intermediary then?
correct.
Okay, very good.
Any other questions? No? All right, let's talk about end users. So we, as you can imagine, it was fairly challenging to try to make a definition of an end user that could apply to anything from compost to mulch to aggregate to PET pellets to metal ingots and so on, but we tried. If you see any way to improve on this definition, we'd love to hear that. But what we have so far is that an end user is a person who uses a product that's made from recycled material after that product has achieved a level of processing resulting in the material replacing or significantly resembling a virgin material, such as plastic pellets, paper pulp, metal ingots, or becoming a homogeneous mixture, such as aggregate, crushed miscellaneous base, mulch, compost, or a material suitable for direct land application. So these are the people who are using those things are the end users. The end users don't have to report, but the flows going to the end user from a processor are reported by that processor, right? The end user categories that we made up have changed a little bit, so this is slightly different list than what was in the last version. We removed intermediate products from the list and we added construction uses to try to make that more clear. So the types of end users that we have are the producers of finished products. So if you have somebody buying your cullet and making new bottles from it, they're an end user. If you have people buying PET pellets and making consumer products with it, that would be an end user. People who are using energy products made from waste or made from an anaerobic digester, that would be an end user. And that end user could be on the same site, right? So if you have an anaerobic digester that's generating energy and they're using it to run a generator on site, you are both the processor and the end user. So you would, in that case, report, this much energy was sold to an end user, which just happens to me myself, right? So we're still going to ask for that flow, just so we have a record of what's happening in the state. But it happens, whether it happens on your own site, if you're processing crushed miscellaneous base and using it in your own site, you'd still report, I've crushed this much and I've used it, and the end user just happens to be on my own site. And then in cases of like compost or, crushed glass that people can just drive up and pick up and take home, any of those processes that yield a material that people can just take directly, those end users are going to be consumers, right? So in case of compost, you could just say, I had 100 tons of compost that I sold directly to consumers. So that's the category level. Same for construction uses, land application, fill operations are all considered end uses. Do we have any comments about who is an end user or any examples that you'd like to clarify?
I've got a question that was asked online a little while ago, and I did send an email back to them, but I thought maybe other folks in the room or listening might also be interested. There's a question about transfer stations and MRFs, but I think it applies to other facilities, haulers, and particularly food waste self-haulers and other facilities. The question was, do they not have to report to the landfills anymore if they have to report directly to CalRecycle? So this would be a facility that or an entity that has a reporting obligation to CalRecycle. If we take, for example, a transfer station or a food waste self-hauler who has an obligation to report directly to CalRecycle, the receiving facility, that landfill, or for that matter, if it's going to a compost facility or another transfer station, oftentimes still has a need for receiving that information themselves. And certainly the fact that we're requiring a reporting obligation to CalRecycle from those entities does not preclude the receiving facility, the transfer station, the landfill, or what have you, the compost facility, from also requiring that information be provided at the gate. These business operations certainly can continue to ask for whatever information they need for their own internal operating needs. So certainly they will still be able to get that information at the gate, at the landfill or compost facility or transfer station, even if that entity also has to report to CalRecycle. So hopefully that clears that up and is helpful.
On the end users, I do appreciate the broadening of those categories somewhat. I thought those were a little bit more clear. There's some customers that would do multiple, I guess, bullets on this example. Like, for example, someone would purchase material wholesale and take a portion of that and produce it into finished products and consume a portion of it, maybe even more than that. How would we distinguish that? And sometimes we wouldn't even know. Is there a way we can pick one and then put an asterisk by that, or how in the world would we explain that?
So are you keeping track of how much is sold directly to the public?
No, what I'm getting at is a lot of the compost producers around the state, the larger ones would be wholesalers, so they would sell it to a customer that would do multiple things with that material, and we wouldn't necessarily be privy to that information.
That is an interesting situation. We'll have to think about that one, I think. Okay. Do you have any ideas, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, my first, we do have to think about it a little bit, but my first thought would be that, basically your best guess based on your understanding of your customer would be sufficient. And if they happen to do, more than one thing with it, that wouldn't be your obligation to sort of investigate and find out what that happens to be. So from my first look, it would be use your best judgment based on your understanding of that customer and what they do, and pick the one that fits best. But let us sort of think a little bit on that and get back to folks, because I know that brings in a little bit of ambiguity, and folks get a little concerned when there's ambiguity in regulation. So let's see what we can do to make things clear and remove that ambiguity.
I just have a technical question concerning land application. Even though you classify it as an end user with 901, that doesn't preempt any other regulatory requirement. As an example, the regional water boards have instituted requirements for reporting on land, the materials and so forth, and land application under their aegis. So this is not preemptory, I assume.
No, you're correct.
No.
Okay, good.
All right, moving on. Reasonable methods. So we alluded a little bit to the reasonable methodologies earlier, and there's a whole section on reasonable methodologies. It's X.9, thank you. And this lays out ways that you can accomplish various aspects of the reporting requirements. So the reasonable methods, we'll start with a discussion of materials sent for recycling. So if you recall, we are going to be asking for total tons by material type sent to recycling. This is also for composting. The material type itself should be reported at the level of segregation at the time of the sale or transfer. So if you're selling paper, say, and you're selling 3 different grades of paper, you're selling white ledger, cardboard containers, and newsprint to various customers, you'd report the total tons of white ledger, total tons of cardboard, and the total tons of newsprint. If, however, you were selling bales of mixed paper, office pack or what have you, you wouldn't have to dig into those bales and determine what percentage of your bale is white ledger and what percentage is newsprint and which percentage is whatever else. Whatever the level of segregation is when it leaves your facility is the level of information that we want reported. This is mostly to help make the reporting easier. We don't want you to have to do more tracking. We don't want you to have to do waste sorts or characterizations of your bales. However you're sending the material out, just tell us that same information. So it should match your records. If there ever were to be some sort of an audit or something, it should just match the records. If you have bills of lading or sales records or invoices or shipment records that show X bales or X tons of PET bottles or of aluminum cans or of glass or what have you, that should match the same as what you've reported. So again, no need to characterize your waste or your bales. For the residuals and any material sent to disposal, so this would include baled material or segregated material that you can't find a market for and decide to dispose of. This disposal, depending on your reporting requirements, if you're a MRF or a transfer station, you have to assign jurisdiction of origin for that material. And if you're a recycling facility or a composting facility that meets the requirement in that subsection B that we talked about earlier, more than 100 tons per quarter of material sent to disposal, then you also have to include jurisdiction of origin. And we lay out some ways that you can obtain this information. You can ask each load. That's sort of the default. Everybody should ask every load, unless you could get information periodically from your haulers. And the haulers can estimate that those jurisdiction of origin by the tons from each of those jurisdiction or hauling routes and billing records. They can use the number and size of bins that are serviced on their customer list. So there are a number of ways that haulers can get the information about where the material came from and pass the jurisdiction of origin information along with the disposed material. One of the things that we've been thinking about is if trucks are going just to a single jurisdiction, that whole truck should be able to be allocated to that jurisdiction, and that some of these reasonable methods of determining jurisdiction should only be used for split trucks, or trucks that service more than one jurisdiction. So when you have a truck that has a more than one jurisdiction in it, you can use one of these methods to determine the breakdown of what's in that truck. But for single jurisdiction trucks, we should just assign the entire weight to whichever jurisdiction they picked it up from. So that was a question. Let people to see from folks who operate either as a hauler or as a MRF transfer station that are receiving this information, whether that seems like a reasonable approach. And then source sector, again, this is for disposal facilities, disposed material only, not for recycling or composting operations, and it's for the facility-wide number for source sector, not per load and not by jurisdiction of origin. But how can you estimate the source sector? Well, again, you can ask every load, every person who drives through your gate, you could just ask them. That's sort of, again, that default state. I just ask everybody, did this come from a house? Did it come from commercial, et cetera? But you can also get periodic reports from haulers, and they can use the tons that they get from each sector, hauling routes and billing records, the number and size of bins serviced, or by truck type. You can make assumptions that all of your side loaders are coming from residential and all your front loaders are commercial and multifamily. If that makes sense for your operations, then that's a reasonable method that you can use to estimate source sector for the materials. And then if you're using one of these methods, one of these reasonable methods laid out in the regulations, or a method that you propose to CalRecycle that CalRecycle approves, then inaccuracies in your estimates will not be penalized. So if you make a mistake somehow, as long as you're using one of these methods, then you're safe from enforcement action. So we want people to make a good faith effort to estimate source sector. We're trying to make it as easy as possible by giving a number of methodologies that you can use to make that estimate. And we're making it so that if you do use one of those methods, the accuracy of the numbers are not going to be subject to enforcement. I said that you could propose a new method that's not included in the regulations, which can certainly happen at any time, but if people can think now of methodologies that work, that would make sense, let us know now so that we can build them into the regulations, and then it doesn't become an issue in the future. It's not a question. We can just write it in, include it in the list, and then everybody is assured that that methodology can be used. So I think that might be the end of reasonable methods. So we'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions or comments on reasonable methodology. Seeing none in the room and nothing online, we can move on to the next section. And I'll pass it back to Ilanka for, well, actually maybe Paulina for discussion on the enforcement section.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paulina Lawrence. I'm the section manager for the solid waste enforcement section at CalRecycle. So I'm just going to go over, it would be under section X.10, and that's the procedure for imposing civil liabilities. The slide in front of you is kind of a compilation of what we've been discussing in past public stakeholder meetings. I'm going to take it a little bit out of order just so that I can follow a little more smoothly in terms of my discussion here. When we're thinking of enforcement with AB 901, the violations that we're looking at basically fall into kind of 4 categories, and they're failure or refusal to submit information on time, willful falsification of records or reports, refusal of inspection of those reports, and failure to keep records. Now, in terms of violations, a notice of violation will be given to those entities, and within that notice of violation, there will be a chance to remedy that particular category, and there will be a deadline to do that by. If it's not remedied by that deadline, then penalties will be imposed, which is what we have currently under the penalty chart. Now, in any kind of a penalty discussion, the department will consider whether or not the violation was intentional, if there's been a history of noncompliance. And we're not like talking about 1, 2, or those facilities who didn't know they needed a report, or those facilities who are reporting but not reporting the type of information that is required within those annual reporting sessions. We're looking at consecutive histories where they're refusing to report on several quarters. We're also looking at the gravity of the violation. So as you look at the different categories, if you see a refusal of inspection, we'll have a different type of gravity of penalty according to the penalty charts. Now, if a hauler does not report or does not report accurately to a facility, that facility is not liable. The only thing that we ask is that you provide the reasonable explanation. Now, in some cases, a facility will not know that they may not have the information correct until they go to report it, and then we may, Cal Recycle will be taking a look at it. That's understandable, but what we're asking in terms of the legislation is that you provide the person who is the hauler, so we're able to then go in and kind of ask the questions of why they didn't report or why they provided inaccurate information. So are there any questions? Come on up.
I'll try to make it, I'll just ask two things.
Okay.
One, in terms of the violations, is within the provisions of AB 901 regulations, will there be the opportunity, once a person's been cited, or maybe repeated sightings, where, going back to my earlier statement, sometimes, and I'm dealing with a couple of issues right now in this regard, the junior inspectors of the LEA or some of the Cal Recycle staff sort of headstrong and they don't read the regulations completely. Is there going to be a provision for a violated entity to ask for an appeal hearing or an administrative hearing, or before the final determination's made? Hopefully you go back to the existing statutes, I think, under the PRC.
Right, so I'm a little close to the mic, sorry. The way the process is set out when we're talking about notices of violation, the penalties amounts, those, if they're challenged, would still have to go through an administrative hearing.
Okay, that's in
Right.
the second
But
part.
we're also, and we got some comments about this yesterday, looking at some language in terms of, well, the context, we're not going to get to that point if it's something that hasn't been corrected within the time period that has been allowed.
The reason why I asked this is that goes into my second question regarding, I think it's AB 1071, the SEPs, where you're applying a civil penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be the provision to, as a part of the settlement, to opt up a SEP proposal, or one that you've chosen? I believe you guys are going through that process right now. At least I talked to Mark DeBee, and he was alluding to that.
Okay, so let me answer that question. Probably most of the people in the room
They won't know.
don't really know what you're talking about, but a SEP is a supplemental environmental project.
Right.
The question you've asked is about 5 steps down the road from what we're talking about in the
Well, I'm
regs, but if you're in a
anticipating, yeah.
situation where there's a potential penalty and there are settlement discussions, certainly a SEP is a possibility within that context, that it would be a settlement. So, but that's really outside the context of these regs, but
It's true, but it does help an operator, one that has to comply, an option to anticipate
Yes.
something for the future.
that option would be available.
Yeah, okay.
Leonard Lang, Upper Room Consulting. The penalty charts, will those be adopted?
Yeah, they'll be part of the regulations.
Thank you.
And for those of you that are looking or listening online, they're actually in section X10.
Okay, if there's nothing more on the enforcement section, oh, I just got one online. Let's see what we have here. I'll just read the question out. I don't think it's specific on enforcement, but that's all right. AB 901 states that disposal facility operators shall submit info on disposal tons by jurisdiction of origin to the department and to counties that request this information. I want to be sure that the confidentiality section that is proposed is not used to allow facilities to claim that this information is proprietary business information. AB 901 language does not seek to reduce the access of this information to counties. I understand that the recycling composting information by jurisdiction of origin is not available to counties, but want to confirm that counties will continue to have access to the disposal tons by jurisdiction of origin by facility. For disposal, the disposal tons by jurisdiction or of origin by facility will be made available. Yes, that's information that has been always made available under the old DRS reporting system and will continue to be made available. We have another question. Self-haulers are the most common culprits. Unwilling or unable to identify jurisdiction of origin. What are facilities expected to include in their reports about tonnage accepted for which they have no jurisdiction of origin when they are unable to obtain contact information for self-haulers? So I think, the question, obviously self-haulers are going to be the group that is going to be the most likely to make mistakes when asked about jurisdiction of origin. Either they aren't sure what you mean, or they don't want to say, or what have you. Using the reasonable methodologies, the preferred method is to ask the loads coming in, and if they tell you that they came from a particular jurisdiction, then that information should be recorded and passed on to CalRecycle. We understand that there may be some issues with that allocation. There might be some inconsistencies or some inaccuracies, but at the moment, I think that the information that's being provided by the person who's driving through the gate should be considered to be the most reliable form of that information. I don't know if, Alonka, you have anything to add to that. You've spent more time on this than me. All right. And then we have a comment from John Sitz in response to the last comment on self-haulers, that it's a requirement now to report jurisdiction of origin for all disposed material, including those that come in through self-hauling. And he's asking how do those facilities do it now, that they should be able to use the same methodology that they're using now to estimate or to determine jurisdiction of origin for disposed material coming via self-haulers in the future under the new regulations. So the original comment was from Deidre Dingman in Contra Costa County. We'll move on to the confidentiality section as the next slide. Give her some time to type back a response if she would like to. Oops. So the last topic for today's discussion is on confidentiality. We've heard a number of times from folks at previous workshops and discussions, and we've also heard some discussion today about the need for confidentiality of the information. Generally speaking, any information that is proprietary business information or confidential is not subject to the Public Records Act requests. And that doesn't matter whether the information comes to CalRecycle via the regular quarterly reports, or if it's in records that are maintained by a facility to support those reports, or if it's in records that are created or obtained by the department during an audit or an investigation of a facility, or if it's a local government entity that requests and receives those records. Proprietary and confidential information is proprietary and confidential regardless of its source. And there is some new language in the last couple sections, X9 through X11. They're kind of scattered through in a couple spots, or X12, I think. We tried to add a little bit more clarity for folks on the confidentiality to make it clearer for people what pieces of information would be kept confidential. But does anybody in the room have any questions or concerns or comments about confidentiality of information? Oh, we got one in the back.
My name's Tom Vogt. I'm with Burtech Waste Industries, and confidentiality is a key concern. Obviously, markets, especially some recycle markets, are fragile. Where you sell into and what the various composition of that recyclable is often proprietary. So that's a key concern of ours, and keeping that confidentiality is very important.
Okay, thank you.
And we've endeavored to both reflect what's in the statute in the regulations to make that clear. So I think there's something that bears just elaborating a little bit, which is, and it touches on, I think, Deidre's comment as well. So there's two different things we're talking about in terms of confidentiality. Reports to CalRecycle, other than what's specified in the statute and regulations, so the actual monetary information, we're not asking for that. But some of the information that will be coming to CalRecycle will absolutely be proprietary, and then it is on CalRecycle's responsibility to keep that confidential. So to the extent that separate from reports into CalRecycle, information we might be providing publicly will be aggregated at a level in which none of those trade secrets would be revealed. So that may, and I think this was talked about a little earlier when the question came out, that may mean that some of the information we provide publicly literally may just be a statewide number, right, depending on the circumstances. But we're very well aware of how important it is to do that. In fact, we would be violating a number of laws if we did, in fact, make that information public when we shouldn't.
So to the extent that we sell to somebody downstream, another recycler, will they need to make sure that their reporting is confidential and proprietary so they don't reveal the source of those tonnages that they receive from us?
Well, so just hearkening back to some of the conversation earlier in terms of recycling, they're reporting what's going out, not what's coming in. And so there's already going to be some limitations in terms of how much we get. And some of the end user changes we've made to the end user reporting will also make that less likely for some of those issues to come up.
Yeah, so there's not going to be any hauler information directly reported from a facility to CalRecycle. They're just going to tell us this is how much we did total, not by this hauler versus by that hauler, unless of course that hauler is failing to report to them, in which case they would let us know, hey, this hauler is not reporting to me, so I can't make my report. That would be the only case in which a facility would ever give information about a specific hauler, would be if that hauler is not complying with providing them with information.
Thank you.
LA County Sanitation Districts, and I just wanted a little clarification on the end users when it comes to this. So the way I understand it is that the end user is not reporting, but the facility would be. So if you have a number of approved destinations, and this would apply to some of our transfer stations as well as biosolids from the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. Would we, if we had approved destinations, be required to identify each and every one of those? Or would we be able to categorize them into a type or region for that end use?
Yeah, so if your end use is, for example, land application, you would just give us one number for all of your land applications. You would say, we sent 100 tons of biosolids to direct land application in this region. And the regions we haven't established yet, and in fact, that was one of the questions that we have for the group is, are there regions that make sense for you that you're already using for other type of reporting? Whether we heard yesterday some ideas as being the water board regions, or we heard counties is a pretty easy region to go by, or we heard Caltrans regions is another possible region to use for the end user category destination. So if you have a favorite, or if you have another idea as to what regions these end user categories should be reported by. So for example, if you're in, water region 5 and all of the sites that you're sending material to are in that region, then you would just report your total to land application in that region. But if instead we go by county and you're sending to 3 different counties, then you would say I sent 15 tons to this county and then 20 tons to the other county. So it depends on where we go with the regions. So again, we are seeking feedback on what regions make sense for people to report by. So please give us your preference, and then we can try to make things as easy as possible for
But that may change, or you're hoping that you'll establish that and it will be set going forward?
Well, once we establish it, then it will have, if we go through the formal process, then any change is going to be much more cumbersome. So the time to establish that is going to be, here in the next month or two is when we're going to establish what the regions are. And if that were to change in the future after we enter the formal regulatory process, it's going to be a lot harder to make that change than it is right now. So.
But just to be clear, that the regions that we're going to be asking to be reported on would be included in the regulations. So it's something that we would identify in the regulations. And so once the regulations are approved, then those regions would be set. And unless the regulations were revised at some point in the future.
And then a further clarification on the reporting facility or entity. If they're reporting to another entity, but they don't have control over where the flow from that entity goes, is that the end of the reporting responsibility for you as the primary source of that material?
Yes. Yeah, so you just tell us, this is where I sent it. That's all your responsibility. You are not responsible for what happens from then on.
And that could be an aggregated number once again by quarter.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have I'm not seeing any more coming up right at, oh, maybe we do have one more.
Just a point of clarification, when you were mentioning the DRS system and talked about disposal, under the existing system, it both recognizes disposal plus ADC. Do you intend to continue that reporting requirement, or are you going to change it in the future?
So the beneficial reuse requirements are mostly staying the same. So you're going to report your ADC, AIC, and other beneficial reuse by material type and jurisdiction of origin. That's the same as it has been before.
But, okay, under the DRS, it's just either disposal, or when you call up a facility, it's either disposal or ADC.
Right, but there is a distinction between ADC and AIC and other beneficial reuse. So there's actually 3 different categories that they're supposed to be reporting currently.
Yeah, well, usually it winds up as ADC, but okay, I just for clarification. That's important for future marketing and so forth of organics and understanding how things are working. Okay, thank you.
I have one question online, and we will, I think, next just step into a general question period. If there are questions about any of the other parts of the regulations that we either haven't covered today or something that you'd like to go back to. But while people think about that, I'll read out it's a two-part question from Catherine Cross, looks like Orange County. The first one is, what about facilities that the LEA is looking at to see if they meet the three-part test and are a recycler? If an LEA investigates a facility and it appears to be a recycler, should the LEA make sure that the facility is therefore reporting to CalRecycle? So I think there's actually two parts within this. The first is whether the reporting requirements for 901 are somehow tied to permit status, and that's the answer to that is no. That our definitions for recycling facilities, MRFs, transfer stations, et cetera, are slightly different and are not tied to or inform permit status of a facility. The second part is whether or not an LEA, in the course of an investigation or their work, if they should be making sure that a facility that should be reporting actually is reporting. And you know, what I would say is that generally we'd always rely on as much help as we can from our local partners, whether the local jurisdictions or the local enforcement agencies, to help in any way that they can. And if they identify a facility that they think might not be reporting in the way that they should, to let us know or to let them know that they should be reporting would be certainly very helpful. Does anybody have anything to add on that point?
I just also wanted to make note too, in order to Catherine's question, that we're also going to update some of the language in each of the state minimum standards regarding record keeping, that they are to be accessible if they are needed to be reviewed at the time of an inspection. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Thank you, Paulina. And the second part of the question was whether there's going to be a check and balance system so that a facility that's reporting to an LEA and a self-monitoring report is the same as the information that's being reported to CalRecycle. And you know, I think generally across reporting requirements, it's always nice to be able to have some checks and balances and take advantage of reporting requirements that are the same or similar across departments or organizations. We don't have planned any formal or structured checking or verification between the systems that we're going to be building into the 901 system, but certainly to the extent that a local jurisdiction or an LEA or a member of CalRecycle staff or somebody else finds that it would be useful, helpful information to be able to check numbers from one reporting system to another for verification. I think that would be something that, you know, each person that might be interested in that can look into for themselves. So moving on, that was the last real slide. I have a sum up slide after this, but if there are any further questions or comments about the rulemaking process in general or the regs that we haven't covered yet, now would be the time. Okay, seeing none. Our next steps, as I said at the beginning, this is our last of the informal workshops. We'll be hoping to begin that formal rulemaking process sometime late winter, early spring of 2017. We're hoping to send out some surveys to the regulated community to get some information on a number of areas that we still could use a little bit of help with. Some of it economic information about, for our purposes of developing the total cost for implementing these regulations, operational needs, so to help us just sort of narrow in on some of this. So expect to see some requests to participate in a hopefully very short survey for people, but if you happen to be particularly interested in participating, We'll try to catch everybody, but if you are particularly interested, it would be greatly appreciated if you just shoot us an email and say, hey, I'd like to make sure I'm on the list, and we'll make sure you get on the survey.
And the survey is intended to help us help you, right? We want to make our system as easy as possible, and if there's any way that we can match the types of records that you're already keeping so that you don't have to change your system as much, that's why we're sending out the surveys, to see what you guys are already doing and how we can try to work together to make it work for as many people as possible, as easily as possible. So you filling out the survey is going to help you in the end. So we're really hoping that you take that survey and get it filled out with some good information so that we can make this work for everybody.
We did just get a question online. It was one that we went over earlier, but I'll just reiterate. The question was, they were told at the previous workshop they could use vehicle type to estimate source sector, and yes, that's true. That is included in one of the reasonable methods in the draft regulations and was included as the last sub-bullet in the presentation. So if you want to go back and take a look at that, that is definitely included in the list of reasonable methods for determining source sector. Let me see.
And the presentation is now posted. I know that it hadn't posted earlier. We did go back and check, and it is now posted both on the public notices for these workshops and on our general AB 901 reporting website. And to find that, it is on most of the emails that we send out, but also you can just type into the search bar in the CalRecycle website, just type in 901, and it's the first link that pops up is the website. And this presentation and all the draft regulations, all the comment letters that we've received from all the entities that have submitted them are all on that website. So if you want to see what other people are saying or anything else, it's all there.
We do have another question, this one from Gloria Whitcomb from Ventura County. Can you please elaborate a bit on the responsibility on notifying local haulers and or facilities on the new regulations? So there is no formal requirement for jurisdictions or counties or cities to notify facilities about these new regulations. These are our regulations, and it really does fall on us to inform the regulated community who needs to be reporting and how. To the extent that a county or a city is operating a facility and haulers bring material to them, they will need to notify that hauler that they have to give them some new information that they haven't previously had to give. We'll be reaching out to the hauling community ourselves to let them know what's coming, what the new requirements are. So they should, for the most part, know what's coming. But again, as a hauler drives up to your gate, it'll be your responsibility to ask for the information that you need to get from that hauler, and there may be an opportunity where they, ask, why are you asking me this? And so there could be a small amount of effort to make sure that they understand that these are new regulations that they're required to adhere to. But on the whole, I think they all should be made aware of it via our efforts. So I guess seeing no more questions, we'll end. Thank you so much. We'll be accepting written comments from folks after these workshops. We hadn't decided exactly the amount of time to give until we wanted to have a sense for the nature of the comments and concerns at this workshop. So in the next few days, keep an eye out for a message coming through the listserv system, letting people know when we are asking for the written comments to be submitted by. And then you can send your emails to the AB 901 reporting mailbox. And then as we move forward, we'll be letting everybody know when the formal rulemaking process starts via the listserv.
Thank you.